The backyard buzzed with music, laughter, and the kind of forced cheer only family reunions can summon. My sister's home in Tulsa had transformed into a summer postcard, white tents, lanterns swaying in the breeze, and rows of folding chairs facing a long buffet table. David and I arrived just past noon. He held my hand loosely as we stepped into the yard, our smiles preset like mannequins in a department store window. My sister, ever the family golden girl, fluttered over to greet us in a flowing sundress, already half a glass of rosé into her day. She hugged me, called me baby girl, like she always had, even though I'm nearly 40. Around us, my nieces and nephews darted between adults, sticky fingers and balloon swords waving. The air smelled of grilled meat and sunscreen. It should have been comforting, but I felt like I was walking onto a stage without knowing my lines. I nodded at a few cousins, exchanged niceties. They asked about work, not really listening. They never did. I've always been the youngest, the one with no kids, no loud presence. At these gatherings, being childless is like being invisible, but not in a peaceful way. In a pitied way. Smiles are stretched just a little too wide. Questions always land too close to wounds I work hard to hide. We found a spot under the shade. David mingled easily. He always did. The perfect son-in-law, the one who brought wine, offered to help set up chairs. As he drifted toward a group by the grill, I stayed behind with my lemonade, tracing the condensation with my thumb, already anticipating what I knew was coming. The first crack came during a chat about schools. Someone's kid had just gotten into a private academy. Another mentioned daycare costs. I smiled politely, sipped my drink. David leaned in with a story about a coworker's toddler flushing a phone down the toilet. Everyone laughed. That's when it started. A cousin's wife, Bethany, maybe, chuckled, pointed at us with her plastic cup. You two have been married, what, 10 years now? Still waiting on the stork, huh? It was said lightly, like a tease. But it sliced. The group laughed. Not cruelly, just unthinking. I forced a smile, shrugged. Still waiting on the universe, I guess. David didn't speak. He sipped his beer and offered a half smile. I felt it immediately. That silence, so familiar. His silence, always louder than any insult. No one noticed the way my shoulders stiffened. Dinner rolled in. Tables filled with potato salad, baked beans, deviled eggs. Toasts were proposed. My sister stood, clinking her glass. I have an announcement, she beamed. Rachel's pregnant. A wave of cheers erupted. Rachel blushed, her husband grinned. My sister wiped away a tear, declaring herself the happiest grandma to be in Oklahoma. Then someone shouted over the noise, David, how do you feel about being the last man standing without kids? Everyone turned. He smiled, looked at me, and said, well, you'd have to ask my wife what it's like being infertile. Laughter froze midair. A few chuckles slipped through. Then silence. I didn't move. The glass in my hand trembled, and I barely managed to set it down without spilling. Eyes were on me. My chest burned. I smiled, a tight, practiced smile. No one said anything, not even him. I nodded, stood up, walked away. Inside the house, I found the guest bathroom. Locked the door, leaned over the sink. My reflection stared back, lipstick fading at the corners. My eyes, tired in that way a mirror reveals but people miss. I splashed water on my face. Thoughts swarmed. This wasn't just about today. This wasn't about one stupid comment. It was about years of pretending. About appointments I went to alone. About whispered, maybe next months. About swallowing shame like pills. About sitting in a car while David talked to friends about fantasy football, and I stayed quiet, knowing I'd cried myself to sleep the night before after another failed test. This party was the spark. But the fire had been building. I thought of a friend who once said, the worst kind of man is the one who lets you take all the blame. Back then, I'd defended David. He's just not great with feelings, I said. That excuse didn't fit anymore. Not after today. Not after he laughed. I didn't cry. I looked at myself, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sad. I felt done. I pulled out my phone, ordered a ride. Backyard laughter spilled in through the window. But no knock came at the door. No footsteps down the hall. David didn't come after me. I walked out without a word. Past the family photos in the hallway. Past my sister's loud laugh echoing through the kitchen. Through the front door, into the waiting car. Sitting in the backseat, I scrolled through my camera roll. One photo caught my eye, David, beaming, arm around my niece, eyes lit up like he was already someone's father. I looked out the window, Tulsa blurring past. I whispered to no one in particular, I'm not going to be the background of someone else's life anymore. Sunlight spilled through the slats of the blinds, landing on the edge of our bed. The room was quiet, but not in the restful way. It was the kind of quiet that leaves a ringing in your ears. The sheets beside me were already cold. David had been up for a while. I moved slowly, not wanting the day to begin, not ready to meet the eyes of the man who had used me as a punchline. My feet touched the hardwood floor, and I followed the faint sound of a coffee maker humming in the kitchen. When I walked in, he was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone like any other morning. He looked up briefly. Did you sleep okay? I blinked at him. That was it? No hesitation, no tension in his voice, just smooth indifference like last night didn't exist. I tried to keep my voice steady. The party was something. He didn't even look up. People joke, you're too sensitive sometimes. That landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I just stood there, watching him stir his coffee. His casual tone only made the weight of it heavier. And just like that, the shift inside me deepened. It wasn't new, I'd heard versions of this before. But this time, I saw it for what it was. He sat at the table, sipping his coffee like he wasn't the man who humiliated me in front of his entire family. You kind of made a scene, walking out like that, he added, glancing up. People were asking about you. I laughed under my breath. It wasn't joy, it was disbelief. He leaned forward, now looking serious. You embarrassed me, Madeline. That wasn't fair. I folded my arms, trying to keep my breath even. You think I embarrassed you? You always do this, he said, shaking his head. Twist things. Like when you said my mom was judging you last Christmas, she wasn't. You just took it that way. That twisted something deeper. This wasn't just about yesterday. This was a pattern, a slow, steady erosion of my ability to trust my own reactions. He kept going, his voice calm, rehearsed. You misread people all the time. It's like you expect to be offended. I opened my mouth, then closed it. There was a time I would have argued, convinced myself I misunderstood. But now I could feel it. This wasn't confusion. It was clarity. While he lectured me, I focused on the taste of the coffee. Bitter. Cold. I wasn't listening anymore. His words melted into background noise as I stared out the window. A robin was picking at the grass, hopping from one spot to another. Free. I turned back to him briefly, nodded. Said nothing. In that moment, I stopped responding not out of submission, but strategy. Later that afternoon, I stepped out onto the back porch and called Rena. She picked up on the first ring. What happened? She asked. I told her everything, from the toast to the silence. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask if I was sure. She said, you've become so good at shrinking, you don't even know you're doing it anymore. That one hit deep. Because it was true. I'd minimized myself to fit his comfort, not mine. My feelings had been folded up neatly and tucked behind his. She didn't let me get away with brushing it off this time. You always defend him. You're afraid of being alone more than you're afraid of being erased. The call ended not with a resolution, but a reflection. I sat with her words longer than I expected. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I pulled out a journal from the bottom drawer, tore out the first few old pages, and wrote down what happened at the party. In detail. Not to vent, but to remember. 5 years ago, I sat at a dinner with his colleagues. I had tried to tell a silly joke, nerves got the better of me and I stumbled a little. Before I could finish, David chimed in, smiling, she means well, bless her heart. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But later that night, I shut the bathroom door and cried quietly over the sink. It didn't feel like a big deal then. But now, that memory came back clear as day. A puzzle piece I hadn't realized was missing. He's always done this. Smiling, kind, gentle while silencing me with a smirk. Rewriting my worth in tiny cuts. When someone silences you with a smile, I whispered aloud, it's still silence. I hid the journal beneath a stack of cookbooks. My hand lingered on it for a moment longer. From now on, I'll write it all down. Every moment, every silence, every twist of truth. I went to the store just to feel normal. Pushing a cart down the cereal aisle felt like something I could control, no hidden meanings, no twisted words. But halfway through comparing two brands of granola, I heard a voice behind me. Madeline, is that you? I turned and there she was, Angela, someone I hadn't seen in years. We'd met through David's work, once or twice. She looked surprised but friendly. We did the polite catch-up dance for a few minutes. Then, almost casually, she said, I remember David once said something so poetic, I think. At that dinner party? He called you a strong woman, despite what your body couldn't give him. She said it like it was sweet. Like it was praise. I nodded, smiled. My hand shook as I picked up a cereal box. I don't even remember which one. As I walked away, I kept hearing it. Despite what your body couldn't give him. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment cruelty. It was a narrative, and other people knew it, heard it, long before I let myself see it. The red dress I wore that night came back to me in pieces. I'd felt pretty in it. I remember the lighting was warm, candles flickering on the long table, David's colleagues and their wives sipping wine and telling stories. Someone had asked him what made him fall for me. I was smiling, expecting something sweet, maybe even silly. Instead, he said, she's stronger than most. Especially given you know what we've been through. What her body's put her through. Laughter. That soft, awkward kind. His hand had rested on my thigh under the table. I smiled. I always smiled. That night, I cried in the shower, the water too hot. I remember repeating, he didn't mean it like that, over and over, like it was some kind of spell that could change what he said. But now, standing in the grocery store parking lot with the bag handles biting into my fingers, I knew better. I didn't rebrand those moments because they were harmless. I rebranded them because I couldn't face the truth. I went home and pulled out my journal. Flipping back through pages, I began underlining entries. Moments where he brushed off my feelings. Comments about how I take things too personally. Jokes made at my expense in front of friends. My laughter, every time, was in the margins. Then I took out a yellow highlighter and marked every time he'd publicly corrected me. It didn't look like a diary anymore. It looked like evidence. If I don't remember it right, I whispered, he gets to rewrite it. I opened my phone and downloaded a recording app. I didn't even tell myself it was for revenge. It was for clarity. I wanted to catch him in the act, not to expose him to the world, but to stop doubting myself. Late that afternoon, there was a knock. Rena. She didn't call first. She never did when she was worried. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. You're pulling away from yourself again. Where are you going when you stare like that? We sat in the living room, quiet for a bit. I told her what Angela said. About the cereal aisle, the red dress, the dinner party. She didn't flinch. She said, what you allow is what continues. But you're allowed to stop now. I wrote those words down after she left. Stuck the note inside my journal, just behind the front cover. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. It was strange, how many memories started crawling back now that I'd named them. Subtle comments. She doesn't really like football, but she tries. Madeline's more of a background kind of person. She means well. I used to laugh. I used to explain them away. I remembered one afternoon during our first year of marriage. I had painted a small canvas, trying out a new hobby. David had looked at it and said, you're better with words, babe. Art's not really your thing. And I never painted again. There were so many of those. Little chips taken out of me, like I was a statue being quietly reshaped by someone else's hands. I saw it now. I wasn't broken. I'd been bent. I opened my laptop, created a new document, and titled it, The Truth as I Remember It. I sat there for a while, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, let's see how well he remembers when it's all on paper. I slid into the car beside David after dinner felt like it always did, agglomerated by small talk, laughter, and the sense that we were playing parts rather than living real life. But tonight, the air felt different. After I made a joke about the mashed potatoes and he watched me laugh, then turned to the salad bowl as if I'd never spoken, I understood how deep the disconnect had grown. Driving away from the restaurant, dusk stretched over the Oklahoma highway. We were silent. That silence, it carried more weight than the words he used at the party. I took a breath. Then I said, "You don't realize how deeply your words cut." He glanced at me, narrowed his eyes. "Here we go again," he said. "You're always too sensitive." He meant it as a dismissal, and I felt the cold inversion of love in that moment. I remembered how effortless he used to be, how restful those silences once were. Now, each pause between us held a question, not about what we said, but what we didn't. And that night I held onto one thought: this isn't small anymore. I sat back. The hum of the engine filled the space. The radio played something faint. I couldn't speak. I watched the road. I felt myself stepping over the edge of something I didn't want to become, a hollow echo waiting to break. Later, in my living room, I vented to Rena over the phone. I told her how he twisted the story, how my stepping out of the party made him the victim, and how the look on his mother's face followed me like a shadow. Rena didn't interrupt. She says, "You're not in a disagreement. You're in a power game." She paused, "Let it sit. If they make you doubt your version of reality, they win." I closed my eyes. In a voice I barely recognized, I said, "I don't want to keep playing by his rules." I started to feel something unfamiliar, clarity, maybe. I'm not asking for his recognition anymore. I'm exposing my own truth. One evening I wrote down everything I felt before I brought it to him. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want to implore. I simply wanted to say, "This is how it stands." He read it. Then he sneered, "So I'm the villain in your little story now?" He accused me of drama, of obsession, of turning our life into a painful scene. I watched him wield his words like armor. I felt the old sting of guilt, of comfort lost. But I didn't shrink. I said, "That's not what I said. Maybe it's what you heard." He had no comeback. He slammed the paper lightly on the table and walked away. At that moment I understood. Speaking out wasn't an invitation for peace. It was entry into a war one never signed up to fight, but one I would win. Days later, I met with his sister-in-law at a quiet cafe. The sugar packets on the table begged me to stir, but I refused the coffee. She looked at me with guarded eyes. "I've seen how he talks to you," she admitted. I didn't know how to help. I asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" She shrugged. It wasn't my business. The simplicity of that answer hit harder than any knife. They watched me drown, and camera didn't roll. That morning I realized silence is complicity. I realized that allowing others to hide while pretending to care is the cruelest act of all. That night, I walked into our study. I didn't announce myself. I simply started sorting old documents, bank statements, account ledgers, our joint will papers. I pulled out the ones in my name to copy. It wasn't panic. It was preparation. I said quietly, "If this continues, I'll protect myself in ways you won't like." His response? A laugh so thin I almost mistook it for pity. "You wouldn't dare wreck my career," he sneered. Maybe I would. Maybe I already had. But that laughter, so familiar, now felt small. And no one laughs at someone who knows they're done playing the game. I left the study then, stepped into the night air. I didn't feel panic. I felt different, sharpened. The door clicked behind me. I breathed in the cool evening. I remembered that sometimes the scariest thing you can do to a bully is nothing, just walk away and let them wonder. David said it wasn't optional. "It's Mom's birthday brunch, Madeline. You'll make things worse if you don't show up." His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone he used when pretending it was about family instead of control. I looked at him across the kitchen and nodded, not because I agreed, but because I needed to see it for myself, how far he'd go. The drive was silent, the kind of silence that feels like a verdict. He drove like always, one hand on the wheel, the other tapping to a song that wasn't playing. I stared out the window at the passing houses, identical, perfect, hollow. By the time we pulled into his mother's driveway, my face had already rearranged itself into something pleasant. The dining room buzzed with polite conversation, clinking glasses, the smell of quiche and coffee. David slipped easily into his public skin, greeting everyone with hugs, compliments, charm. He placed a hand on my back as if to say, "See, we're fine." Then, when his sister asked if everything was okay between us, he smiled and said, "Oh, she's just been a little hormonal lately. You know how it gets." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, it was worse. Soft, awkward, complicit. I felt my stomach twist. I smiled too, for show, and took another sip of my water to keep from saying what I really wanted to. Then came the toast. He stood, glass raised, the picture of confidence. To strong women, he began. The ones who smile through infertility and still make a house a home. Every sound in the room disappeared. The words hit like a slap that didn't need a hand. I saw his mother's eyes drop to her plate. Someone coughed. Another whispered, he didn't mean it that way. But I knew better. This wasn't ignorance, it was cruelty wearing perfume. I sat there frozen. My body remembered every insult disguised as affection, every smirk, every small humiliation that I'd absorbed to keep the peace. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, a warning to stay small. And then, for the first time in years, I didn't. I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood on tile was louder than his toast. I stood, steady. My hands didn't shake. You think cruelty sounds poetic when it's dressed in a toast, I said. The room went still. David blinked, confused, not because he didn't understand, but because he never thought I'd speak. I've been quiet to keep the peace, I continued. But I've learned that silence doesn't protect, it permits. He tried to interrupt. I raised my hand. You've humiliated me in front of friends, family, strangers, and I let it go. But not this time. You all laughed, I said, looking around the table. So don't tell me now that you didn't hear it. No one moved. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was heavy, honest. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the faintest whisper, good for her. Outside, the sunlight felt different, too sharp. David followed, voice low and furious. Why would you do that? You just ruined everything. I stopped, faced him. I didn't ruin anything, I said. I revealed it. He stepped closer, jaw tight. You sound insane. You need help. I smiled, not from joy, but from recognition. If defending my dignity makes me unstable, maybe I've finally stabilized. He kept shouting as I walked to my car, but his words didn't stick anymore. They fell flat against the air between us. I started the engine, left the driveway, and didn't look back. I drove without a destination until instinct took me to the lake, the place we used to visit when we still believed in the idea of us. The water looked exactly the same, calm and detached, as if mocking what we'd become. I sat by the shore, shoes off, toes in the cold sand. For the first time in a long while, I didn't think about how to fix it. I thought about how much I had given up, how many parts of myself I had trimmed away just to fit into his world. I had been loyal to a version of him that never truly existed. I stared at the water and felt something shift, not anger, not even sadness. Just relief. Peace, I realized, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the decision to stop participating in someone else's war. I picked up a small stone, turned it in my palm, and tossed it into the lake. Ripples spread outward, breaking the reflection of the sky. I may have been his wife, I whispered, but I'll never again be his casualty. The ripples widened, then softened into stillness. This time, the silence I walked into was mine, and I wasn't afraid of it. The morning after the brunch, I woke to a phone buzzing uncontrollably. Missed calls, texts, notifications stacking faster than I could read. For a split second, I wondered if someone had died. Then I opened a group message from my cousin, and it was me who felt like she had. Screenshots. Dozens of them. Private emails I'd written months, even years ago, moments I thought were buried in the sacred quiet of therapy and late-night journaling. There they were, highlighted, cropped, shared out of context. Phrases pulled from pain, made to look like rants from someone spiraling. She's always been dramatic. I told you she was unstable. Poor David dealing with that. The screenshots had his fingerprints all over them, not just the content, but the intention. He didn't just want to embarrass me. He wanted to erase me. To rewrite the story before I could. Some family members messaged with concern, others didn't say a word. Silence can cut deeper than slander. But what stayed with me wasn't what they said. It was knowing he did this. Someone I'd trusted with my deepest wounds had turned them into weapons. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and drove to Layla's house without texting first. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in." She poured tea but didn't ask questions. I showed her the screenshots, the messages, the group threads. She read them quietly, jaw tightening with every swipe. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady. "He's not trying to win," she said. "He's trying to discredit you before you speak." "I don't know what to do," I said. "If I fight back, it'll make me look worse." She shook her head. "You don't fight back. You speak forward. Tell your story. Your words. No edits." I hesitated. What if they think I'm just being bitter? Or worse, unstable? She leaned in. "Or maybe they'll recognize their own story in yours. You're not the only one who's been silenced." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk with a blank document and a mind full of noise. But as I typed, something happened. The noise became music. Each word cut through the fog. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I told the truth. I wrote about the woman I used to be, hopeful, patient, full of faith and love. I wrote about how I became someone else, slowly, painfully, while trying to keep the peace. When silence became my refuge, I wrote, truth became my rebellion. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. The story spoke loud enough. To anyone being asked to shrink in order to stay loved, I ended, don't. At dawn, I posted it. No tags. No photos. Just the letter. My voice. Unfiltered. It didn't explode right away. But by noon, the messages started coming in. Strangers. Old classmates. Women I hadn't spoken to in years. "You said what I've never had the courage to. I felt like you were writing about me. Thank you. Just thank you." Even a distant aunt messaged. "I never saw it. I see it now. I'm sorry." David's family went quiet. A few unfriended me. Others stayed silent. But one cousin, the one who used to roll her eyes when I'd mentioned therapy, sent a single line. "You were never crazy." Just unheard. I didn't feel triumphant. But I did feel visible. And that was new. That was something. Later that evening, an email from David landed in my inbox. Subject: "You went too far." He claimed I'd painted him as a monster. Said I'd humiliated him, cost him clients, damaged his hard-earned reputation. I read it once. Then again. Then I clicked reply and typed one sentence. "Truth doesn't ruin, it reveals." Then I deleted his number from my phone. Blocked his email. Closed the laptop. And for the first time in weeks, I inhaled deeply, no guilt, no second guessing. Just breath. Just me. I pulled out my old journal. Not the one he used to read. A new one. Fresh pages. This time, I didn't write because I was lost. I wrote because I was found. He tried to turn my story against me. So I wrote it in ink, where he couldn't edit. I sat in my home office, surrounded by stacks of journals and folders I hadn't opened in years. The silver bracelet with the word, enough, caught my eye on the desk. I slid it onto my wrist. For so long I'd bent my voice, shaped my story to fit the comfort of others, his comfort, her approval, the family legacy. Tonight, that ended. I reached for my phone and sent a simple text, "We need to talk." Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The streetlight outside flickered softly as I leaned back in the chair, feeling that shift inside me, solid. The priorities had changed. I wasn't part of someone else's dream anymore. I was scripting my own. Early the next morning I found myself at the family estate's conference room in Boulder. That grand room where the asset transfer first took shape, where promises were made, and broken. Theora stood at the front, dressed in her facade of legacy and poise. "We're here for the family legacy," she declared. I sat across from Roman and Evander, the tension between us rigid as concrete. When Theora presented the revised corporate overview, my original design rebranded in her name, I looked at her with calm clarity. "I designed this architecture," I said. "We need to revisit the ownership clause." Silence. I felt the room pivot. I sensed they knew I was no longer a placeholder. I opened my laptop and projected the video footage I'd found. Theora and Evander in a candid meeting, discussing share shifts and how to exclude my involvement financially. Faces turned stark. Evander's jaw clenched. Roman's eyes traveled to Theora. Her smile froze. "Here is the proof," I said, voice steady. Not emotion. Evidence. The room's industrial calm dissolved into shock. Theora tried to deflect. "That's taken out of context." I responded. "The context is you maintaining your power by erasing mine." That moment flipped the board. The shift was unmistakable. I held their attention. I held the moment. My empowerment felt like both triumph and reckoning. Thea pulled a folder from under the table and slammed it down. Madeline, you're erratic, she said, voice too loud for elegance. Unfit to serve the family image. She smoothed her skirts like she'd rehearsed this. But I stood. I looked her in the eye. My image is not for sale. My voice is not a liability. The predator hunted by making you feel small. I refused the prey role. If you want unity, earn it, not extract it. The room shifted again, silence heavy. Not the silence of waiting, but of realignment. The power had changed hands. Later that afternoon I walked my favorite trail near Boulder. The air was crisp, the path rocky, but I felt clear. I called Sylvan. His voice was calm. Not just over for you, I told him. It's over for that version of me they thought they owned. I smiled at the thought. Retribution isn't revenge, it's reclaiming dignity, and I felt both calm and charged. The quiet around me wasn't stasis. It was possibility. Back in the living room, I picked up an untouched envelope on the coffee table. Inheritance, Vanessa Drayton. I didn't open it. I understood now. Value isn't always in what's offered, it's in the choice. And for the first time in a long time, I got to decide the deal. When I walked into that boardroom, every pair of eyes followed me. Some stared with suspicion, others with curiosity. None of them expected me to lead. Thea stood at the head of the table, all poise and polished rhetoric, launching into another well-rehearsed speech about unity and legacy. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. I sat quietly, letting the weight of the space press in, the mahogany table, the framed family portraits hanging like judgment, the scent of old money. I'd once thought all of it meant something. Now, it felt like a stage. And I'd finally learned my lines. My mind ticked through the moments they all chose silence when they should have asked questions. Every time I was dismissed, told to be patient, told to stay quiet. I inhaled slow and deep, then stood. The click of the remote in my hand echoed louder than her speech. What you're calling unity has been mine to create, and you erased it. The room stilled. Then the screen came alive. The footage rolled, Thea and Evander, casually confident, speaking with lawyers about transferring shares. My name never mentioned. My work reduced to numbers. The dates matched the emails I'd archived. It was indisputable. Gasps broke the stillness. Even David shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the exit. Roman looked like he'd been slapped. Thea's smile dropped. Evander's knuckles turned white against the polished table. Your power came from my labor, I said. Your silence came from my shame. Now, that ends. The room flipped. Every face that had once dismissed me now looked like they were reassessing where to stand. Some leaned forward. Others looked away. But no one interrupted. I had the floor, and the evidence. Thea, ever the tactician, snapped to her next play. She pulled out a printed memo and started reading. Due to recent events and public actions, I move that Madeline be considered emotionally unfit to represent family interests. She looked up with that smug smile. You want power? Let's test your foundation. I didn't flinch. My foundation was you building on mine. I'm just choosing to live on my own ground now. The murmurs returned, but this time, they weren't one-sided. I saw doubt in Roman's eyes. I saw fear in Evander's. Even Thea's voice cracked ever so slightly when she tried to continue. I checked my phone. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. Some short, proud of you. Others full paragraphs. I scrolled for a second, then looked up. You can file your papers. Boss your image. But don't mistake silence for submission. The weight of the words landed. This wasn't about business anymore, it was about who had the right to speak. After the meeting, I stepped out onto the terrace behind the estate. The cold air sobered me. I rested my hands on the railing, letting the wind rush over my face. The bracelet on my wrist, enough, felt warmer than it should have. My heartbeat began to slow, finally catching up with the pace of what I'd just done. I thought of everything that had led here. Of how easily they'd stolen my work, my time, my voice, and how long I'd helped them do it by trying to keep the peace. The glass doors behind me reflected the boardroom lights dimming. The meeting was over, but the aftermath had just begun. Later that evening, I drove alone. The estate faded in my rearview mirror. I didn't blast the radio or call anyone. I just drove. Thought. Let the silence settle. I whispered to myself, more of a promise than a statement. I won this moment. Now I win the life. The front door clicks shut behind me. My keys hit the small oak bowl by the entry, and for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I don't flinch at the sound. Light filters in through the wide windows, falling across the pale wood floor like a gentle reminder. This space is mine. It's quiet, not the kind of silence that presses against your chest, but the kind that allows you to breathe all the way in. I take off my coat, walk toward the living room, and set the silver bracelet, the one etched with the word, enough, onto the mantel. Not as a symbol of battle, but as something claimed, owned. The sofa is empty. No briefcases, no voices trying to override mine. Just me. I lower myself into the armchair, close my eyes, and let my body sink into stillness. This isn't a victory lap. It's something deeper, something steadier. I whisper it aloud, just for me, I'm here now. I stayed. Later that morning, I park outside the community center. The sign above the doorway reads, Phoenix Rise Center. Below it, a small plaque reads, Your story isn't broken, it's your power. I walk in, clipboard in hand, and greet the women gathering in the front room. Their faces carry lines and stories, I see them all. Women starting over, some from divorce, some from loss, some just needing to hear they still matter. When everyone's seated, I speak. I used to believe that my value was in making other people comfortable. I don't believe that anymore. A few heads tilt. One woman wipes at her eye without drawing attention. I don't tell them every detail. But I tell enough. I lost myself in their version of me. But I took her back. Not through revenge, through clarity. The room hums. A kind of silent agreement. They know what that feels like. After the workshop ends, I thank each woman by name. I don't rush it. They deserve to be seen. I step outside and walk along Boulder Creek. The water glistens under the late morning sun. Sylvan meets me there, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. We don't talk right away. Just walk. I nod toward the old footbridge where David and I once stood while he praised Wren's business savvy as if I weren't the one who trained her. I used to stand here and wonder if I was invisible, I say. Sylvan doesn't interrupt. I continue, I used to think these stones were obstacles. Now I think they're steps. We stop by the creek. I kneel, trail my fingers through the cold stream. It doesn't freeze me. It wakes me up. I look up at Sylvan. Change doesn't ask for your permission. He smiles. No, it doesn't. But you gave yourself permission anyway. Evening falls slower than usual. I return home and light a few candles in the dining room. Layla arrives first, then Rena. Sylvan brings a pie. We sit around my small table, a space without pretense or politics. No branding, no performative smiles. We share food, stories, and laughs. Real ones. Rena talks about launching a consulting business from her garage. Layla wants to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. We raise our glasses. To not being perfect, I say, but being enough for ourselves. The clink of glass sounds like music. Dessert comes and goes. The last light fades. I look around and think, this is the kind of wealth I never saw coming. Not money, not titles, but truth, choice. Later, after hugs and waves from the porch, I sit alone on the back deck. The night is cool, the sky wide open. I pull out my journal and write, not because I'm unraveling, but because I'm anchoring. I was someone's silence. Now I am my own voice. I reach for the envelope labeled Inheritance, Venetia Drayton. My name beneath hers. I hold it for a long moment, then place it back on the table. I don't need to open it tonight. I don't need it to tell me what I'm worth. I close the back door gently behind me, the final draft of that life locked outside. Standing in the hallway, I let the stillness settle one more time. I smile. The next time I step into a gathering, it won't be to shrink. It'll be to stand.